December 10th, 2021. A Friday night in western Kentucky. Families were wrapping presents, kids were dreaming of snow days, workers were clocking out, heading home for the weekend, and then the sky turned black. A wall of wind, debris, and death, roaring at 190 miles per hour, tore through the heart of a small American town. In less than 30 minutes, Mayfield, Kentucky, was gone. Tonight, we're going inside the storm that shocked the nation, the factory that became a tomb, and the survivors who lived to tell a story no one should ever have to tell. This is Mayfield, tornado horror in Kentucky. Let me take you back. Just a few hours before the nightmare began, Mayfield is a quiet town, tucked into the rolling hills of Graves County, Kentucky. Population, around 10,000. The kind of place where everyone knows your name, where Friday night football is religion, and where the biggest employer is a candle factory on the edge of town, Mayfield Consumer Products. You've probably never heard of it, but if you've ever bought a scented candle at a big box store, there's a good chance it came from here. On the night of December 10th, more than 100 workers were inside that factory, making candles for the holiday rush. Vanilla, cinnamon, pine, the smells of Christmas filling the air. Outside, the streets were decorated. Lights twinkled on Main Street. The courthouse square glowed with festive cheer. Everything seemed safe. But 20 miles to the west, something was building, something massive, something that meteorologists would later call unprecedented. Here's the thing about tornadoes in December. They're rare. Tornado season in the United States typically peaks in spring, April through June, when warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico collides with cold, dry air sweeping down from Canada. That's when conditions are perfect for supercells, those rotating thunderstorms that spawn the most violent tornadoes. But December? December is supposed to be quiet. Yet, on this night, the atmosphere was primed for disaster. Unseasonably warm air, dew points in the 60s, wind shear that would make any storm chaser's heart race. The ingredients were all there. By late afternoon, the Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk for severe weather across the Mid-South. Tornado watches went up. Warnings began to flash across TV screens. But here's the cruel irony. People in Mayfield had heard warnings before. Tornado warnings in December? It felt unlikely, unreal. So life went on. The factory kept running, families kept shopping, kids kept playing, and the storm kept growing. Let's talk about the candle factory for a moment, because this building, this place, is going to become the epicenter of tragedy. Mayfield Consumer Products employed over 500 people. It was a lifeline for the community, one of the few places where you could get steady work, decent pay, benefits. On the night shift, around 110 workers were inside. Assembly line workers, forklift operators, supervisors, people just trying to make a living, trying to provide for their families. The building itself, a sprawling single-story structure, concrete block walls, a flat roof supported by steel trusses, no basement, no reinforced safe room, just a factory. As the evening wore on, some workers started getting nervous. They were checking their phones, seeing the warnings, hearing the sirens in the distance. And here's where the story gets dark. According to multiple survivor accounts and later, a class action lawsuit, some workers asked if they could leave early. They wanted to get home, to get to safety, to be with their families. But they were told no. They were told that if they left, they'd be fired. Now, the company has denied this. They've said that workers were free to leave, that safety was their top priority. But the survivors, they tell a different story. One worker later said, quote, "We were told we'd lose our jobs if we walked out, so we stayed. We stayed." By 8 o'clock that evening, the National Weather Service in Paducah was tracking a monster, a supercell thunderstorm, rotating violently, moving northeast at 50 miles per hour. Radar showed a debris ball, a signature that meant one thing: a tornado was on the ground, and it was big. At 8:54 p.m., a tornado warning was issued for Graves County. At 9:26 p.m., the warning was upgraded to a tornado emergency. That's the highest level of alert. It means, this is real, this is happening, take cover now. Sirens wailed across Mayfield. Emergency managers were on the radio, begging people to get to shelter. But in the factory, work continued. The machines kept humming, the candles kept moving down the line, and outside, in the darkness, the roar was getting louder. At 9:27 p.m., the tornado crossed into the Mayfield city limits. Eyewitnesses described it as a wall, not a funnel, not a rope, a wall of wind and debris, half a mile wide, blotting out the sky. The sound? Like a freight train, like a jet engine, like the end of the world. It hit the west side of town first. Homes exploded, roofs peeled off like paper. Trees, some of them 100 years old, were ripped from the ground and hurled through the air like toothpicks. Cars were picked up and thrown. Power lines snapped. Transformers exploded in showers of sparks. And then, the tornado turned toward downtown, toward the factory. Imagine this. You're inside a building. The lights flicker. The walls start to shake. You hear the roar getting closer, closer, and then the roof is gone. That's what happened at Mayfield Consumer Products. The tornado hit the factory at approximately 9:28 p.m. The roof collapsed in seconds. Steel trusses weighing tons came crashing down. Concrete walls buckled and fell. Machinery was thrown across the floor. Workers scrambled, screaming, trying to find cover. Some dove under tables. Some ran for interior hallways. Some were trapped, pinned under debris. One survivor, a woman named Kyanna Parsons-Perez, live-streamed from beneath the rubble. Her voice, shaking, terrified, went viral. "We are trapped," she said. "Please, someone help us. We are trapped." In the darkness, in the chaos, people were calling out names, husbands looking for wives, friends looking for friends, and some didn't answer. The tornado didn't stop at the factory. It roared through downtown Mayfield, a historic district filled with brick buildings, some dating back to the 1800s. The Graves County Courthouse, a beautiful old structure with a clock tower, destroyed. The clock stopped at 9:27. The water tower, a landmark visible for miles, toppled. Churches, businesses, homes, all reduced to rubble. The tornado was rated EF4, with winds estimated at 190 miles per hour. But some meteorologists believe that in certain spots it may have reached EF5 intensity, the highest rating on the scale. That means winds over 200 miles per hour, winds that can erase everything. And it didn't stop in Mayfield. The tornado stayed on the ground for 165 miles. It carved a path of destruction across 4 states. It lasted for nearly 3 hours. It was the longest-track tornado in U.S. history. When the winds finally died down, when the roar faded to silence, the survivors emerged into a landscape that looked like a war zone. Buildings were gone. Streets were unrecognizable. The air was thick with dust, with insulation, with the smell of gas and splintered wood. And then, the screaming started. People searching for loved ones, rescue workers arriving, pulling at debris with their bare hands, dogs barking, sirens wailing, helicopters circling overhead. At the candle factory, the scene was horrific. The building had collapsed into a twisted heap of steel and concrete. Survivors were trapped inside, some injured, some dying. Rescue crews worked through the night, cutting through metal, lifting beams, calling out names. By dawn, they had pulled dozens of people from the rubble. But 8 workers, 8 people who had clocked in for a Friday night shift, who had just wanted to earn a paycheck, were dead. 8 families shattered, 8 lives gone, and across Mayfield, across Graves County, the death toll climbed. 24 people dead in Graves County alone, 57 across Kentucky, 74 across the entire outbreak, hundreds injured, thousands homeless. A town changed forever. In the hours after the tornado, Mayfield became a place of ghosts. The sun rose on December 11th to reveal a town that no longer existed. Entire neighborhoods were gone, not damaged, gone, Foundations swept clean, trees stripped bare, cars wrapped around telephone poles. The downtown square, once the heart of the community, looked like a bomb had gone off. Emergency responders from across the region poured in. The National Guard was deployed. FEMA set up command centers. Governor Andy Beshear toured the damage and broke down in tears. "This is the worst tornado disaster in Kentucky history," he said. "We will rebuild, but we will never forget." President Biden declared a federal disaster. Aid started flowing in. But for the people of Mayfield, the people who had lost everything, it felt like too little, too late. Because here's the thing about disasters like this. The cameras show up for a few days. The nation watches, horrified. People donate. Politicians make speeches. And then the cameras leave. But the survivors, they're left to pick up the pieces, to bury their dead, to figure out how to rebuild a life when everything they knew is gone. In the days and weeks after the tornado, as the shock began to fade, people started asking questions, hard questions, uncomfortable questions. Why did so many people die in the factory? Why were workers told they couldn't leave? Could this have been prevented? The company, Mayfield Consumer Products, issued statements. They said they had followed all safety protocols. They said workers were free to leave. They said they did everything they could. But the survivors, they weren't buying it. A class action lawsuit was filed, alleging that the company had prioritized profits over safety, that workers had been threatened with termination if they left, that there was no adequate shelter, no evacuation plan. The lawsuit is still ongoing. The company continues to deny wrongdoing, but the damage is done. The trust is broken. And 8 families are left without answers, without justice, without the people they loved. Let's zoom out for a moment. Because the Mayfield tornado wasn't an isolated event. It was part of a massive outbreak that stretched across the central United States. On the night of December 10th and into the early hours of December 11th, more than 50 tornadoes touched down. Arkansas, Missouri, Tennessee, Illinois, Kentucky. The Mayfield tornado was the deadliest, the longest tracked, the most destructive. But it wasn't alone. In Edwardsville, Illinois, an Amazon warehouse was hit. 6 workers died. In Bowling Green, Kentucky, another tornado killed 17 people. Across the region, communities were devastated. Lives were lost. Families were torn apart, and meteorologists were left scratching their heads. Because this wasn't supposed to happen, not in December, not like this. So, what made this outbreak so unusual, so deadly? Let's talk about the science for a moment. Tornadoes form when certain atmospheric conditions come together. You need warm, moist air at the surface. You need cold, dry air aloft. You need wind shear, which is a change in wind speed or direction with height. And you need a trigger, something to lift that warm air and get the storm going. In the spring, these conditions are common, but in December, they're rare. Yet on December 10th, 2021, everything aligned. A powerful low-pressure system moved across the central U.S., pulling warm, humid air northward from the Gulf of Mexico. Temperatures in the 60s and 70s, dew points in the 60s. In December. At the same time, a strong jet stream was diving south, bringing cold air and intense wind shear. The result? A perfect storm. Supercells developed, rotating violently, spawning tornado after tornado. And because it was nighttime, because it was December, because people weren't expecting it, the death toll was catastrophic. Climate scientists have pointed to this outbreak as a potential sign of things to come. As the planet warms, as weather patterns shift, late-season severe weather may become more common, which means Mayfield might not be the last. After the tornado, damage survey teams from the National Weather Service fanned out across the affected areas. Their job? To assess the damage and assign a rating on the enhanced Fujita scale, which ranges from EF0, the weakest, to EF5, the strongest. The Mayfield tornado was rated EF4, with estimated winds of 190 miles per hour, but some experts believe it should have been rated EF5. Why the debate? Because EF5 damage is rare. It requires complete destruction of well-built structures. We're talking homes swept away to the foundation, with debris scattered for miles. We're talking vehicles thrown hundreds of yards. We're talking total annihilation. In Mayfield, there were pockets of damage that met those criteria. Homes completely gone, the factory obliterated, trees debarked and snapped at the base. But the rating system is conservative. It requires multiple indicators of EF5 damage, and the survey teams didn't find enough. So, it was rated EF4. But for the people who lived through it, the rating doesn't matter. Whether it was EF4 or EF5, the result was the same. Destruction, death, devastation. Let me tell you about some of the people who survived. Kyanna Parsons-Perez, the woman who live-streamed from beneath the rubble. She was trapped for hours. She thought she was going to die. But rescuers found her, pulled her out, and she lived. She's since become an advocate for worker safety, speaking out about what happened that night, demanding change. Then there's the family who huddled in a bathtub as their home disintegrated around them. The walls collapsed, the roof flew away, but they survived, clinging to each other, praying, hoping. There's the firefighter who lost his own home, but spent the next 72 hours pulling people from the rubble, saving lives. There's the teacher who opened her undamaged home to displaced families, housing strangers, feeding them, giving them a place to heal. These are the stories that don't always make the headlines. The stories of resilience, of courage, of humanity in the face of unimaginable horror. Because yes, the tornado destroyed Mayfield, but it didn't destroy the spirit of Mayfield. Let's return to the factory for a moment, because this is where the story gets complicated. In the months after the tornado, survivors and families of the victims filed a class action lawsuit against Mayfield Consumer Products and its parent company. The allegations were serious. The lawsuit claimed that workers were threatened with termination if they left, that the company failed to provide adequate shelter, that there was no evacuation plan, no training, no preparation. The company denied everything. They said workers were free to leave. They said they had followed all OSHA regulations. They said the tornado was an ACT of God, something no one could have prevented. And legally, they might be right, because in the United States, employers are generally not required to have tornado shelters. There's no federal law mandating evacuation plans for severe weather. So even if the company did tell workers they'd be fired for leaving, it might not be illegal. Which raises a bigger question. Should it be? Should companies be held accountable for keeping workers in harm's way? Should there be stronger protections, stricter regulations? The lawsuit is still working its way through the courts, but for many, the damage is already done. 8 people are dead, and no amount of money, no legal victory will bring them back. In the immediate aftermath of the tornado, something beautiful happened. The community came together. Neighbors helping neighbors, strangers pulling people from the rubble, churches opening their doors, schools becoming shelters. Donations poured in from across the country. Food, water, clothing, supplies. Volunteers arrived by the hundreds, chainsaws in hand, ready to work. The Red Cross set up shelters. FEMA brought in trailers. Non-profits coordinated relief efforts. And slowly, painfully, Mayfield began to heal. But healing doesn't mean forgetting, because 2 years later, the scars are still visible. Empty lots where homes once stood, businesses that never reopened, families that never came back. The population of Mayfield has dropped. Some people couldn't afford to rebuild, some couldn't bear to stay. And for those who remain, life is different. Every time the sky turns dark, every time the sirens wail, the fear comes rushing back. Because they know what a tornado can do. They've seen it, they've lived it, and they'll carry that trauma for the rest of their lives. Let's talk about what happens after the cameras leave, because the immediate aftermath of a disaster is just the beginning. In Mayfield, the housing crisis is severe. Thousands of homes were destroyed, and there simply aren't enough places for people to live. Rent prices have skyrocketed. Affordable housing is almost impossible to find. Some families are still living in FEMA trailers more than 2 years later. Others have moved in with relatives, crammed into small spaces, trying to make it work. The mental health toll is staggering. PTSD, depression, anxiety, survivors reliving the trauma every time a storm rolls through, children who can't sleep, who have nightmares, who are terrified of the wind. And the resources, they're limited. Counselors are overwhelmed. Support groups are packed. The need is enormous, but the funding is finite. This is the reality of disaster recovery. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. And for Mayfield, the finish line is still a long way off. So, where does Mayfield go from here? The rebuilding is ongoing. New homes are going up. Businesses are reopening. The downtown square is slowly coming back to life. But it will never be the same. Because you can rebuild buildings, you can replace things, but you can't replace people. You can't bring back the 8 workers who died in the factory. You can't undo the trauma, the grief, the loss. What you can do is learn. Learn from the mistakes. Learn from the failures. Learn how to be better prepared for the next time, because there will be a next time. Tornadoes aren't going away. If anything, they're becoming more unpredictable, more dangerous. And if we don't take action, if we don't strengthen our buildings, improve our warning systems, protect our workers, then Mayfield won't be the last tragedy. It will just be the first of many. And that's where we'll pause for now. We've covered the storm, the destruction, the immediate aftermath. We've heard the survivor stories, examined the factory controversy, and looked at the long-term impact. But there's more to this story. In the second half, we're going to dive deeper into the meteorological mystery of this outbreak. We'll explore the climate science, the warning systems, and what this disaster reveals about our vulnerability. We'll hear more survivor voices. We'll look at the rebuilding efforts, and we'll ask the hard questions about what comes next. Because Mayfield's story isn't over. It's still being written. Welcome back. Let's talk about something that haunts meteorologists to this day. Why December? Why did one of the most violent tornado outbreaks in American history happen in the dead of winter? To understand this, we need to go back to the basics of tornado formation. Tornadoes need energy. They need instability in the atmosphere, warm air colliding with cold air, wind shear that creates rotation. In the spring, these ingredients are abundant. The sun is getting stronger, heating the ground, creating that warm, moist air. Cold fronts sweep down from Canada. The jet stream is active, providing that crucial wind shear. It's a recipe for disaster. But in December, the sun is weak. The days are short. The ground is cold. Tornado outbreaks in December are so rare that many meteorologists go their entire careers without seeing one. Yet on December 10th, 2021, the atmosphere had other plans. Here's what happened. A powerful low-pressure system developed over the central United States. This wasn't just any low-pressure system. This was a beast. It pulled warm, humid air northward from the Gulf of Mexico with incredible force. Temperatures across Kentucky, Tennessee, Arkansas, they were in the 70s in December. People were wearing T-shirts. Kids were playing outside without jackets. It felt wrong. And it was wrong. Because at the same time, a strong jet stream was diving south, bringing cold, dry air from Canada. The temperature contrast was extreme. And when you have extreme temperature contrast, when you have that warm, moist air colliding with cold, dry air, you get instability. Add in the wind shear, the rotation, the lift, and you get supercells. Multiple supercells developed that evening, marching across the landscape like an army, and they spawned tornado after tornado after tornado. The Storm Prediction Center later called it a once-in-a-generation event. But here's the terrifying part. It might not be once in a generation anymore. Now, I want to be very clear about something. You cannot point to a single tornado, a single storm, and say, climate change caused this. Weather is complex. There are countless variables, countless factors. But what you can say is this. Climate change is altering the patterns. It's shifting the seasons. It's making extreme weather more frequent, more intense, more unpredictable. And late-season tornado outbreaks, they're becoming more common. Studies have shown that tornado season is starting earlier and lasting longer. The traditional peak in April and May is spreading out, extending into the fall and winter months. Why? Because the atmosphere is warmer. There's more moisture available. The jet stream is becoming more erratic. All of this creates conditions that favor severe weather, even in December. So, while we can't say climate change caused the Mayfield tornado, we can say that climate change is making events like this more likely. And that should terrify us. Because if a December tornado outbreak can kill 74 people, can destroy entire towns, what happens when these events become the norm? Let's talk about warnings for a moment. Because one of the questions people asked after Mayfield was, did the warning system fail? The answer is complicated. The National Weather Service issued warnings hours before the tornado hit. Tornado watches went up in the afternoon. Warnings were issued as the storms developed. The Mayfield tornado specifically? A tornado warning was issued at 8:54 p.m., more than 30 minutes before it hit the town. At 9:26 p.m., the warning was upgraded to a tornado emergency, the highest level of alert. So, the warnings were there. The information was available. But here's the problem. Warnings only work if people heed them. And in Mayfield, many people didn't. Why? Because tornado warnings are common in this part of the country. People hear them all the time. And most of the time, nothing happens. It's called warning fatigue. People become desensitized. They hear the siren, they check the radar, they see the storm is still miles away, and they go back to what they were doing. And in December, when tornadoes are rare, that fatigue is even worse. People thought, it's December, it's probably nothing, I'll be fine. And for most people, that calculation has worked out. Most tornado warnings don't result in a direct hit. But when you're wrong, when the tornado does hit, the consequences are catastrophic. This brings us to a fundamental problem with disaster preparedness. Humans are terrible at assessing risk. We're wired to think, it won't happen to me. We downplay threats. We assume we'll be lucky. Psychologists call this optimism bias, and it kills people. In Mayfield, people heard the warnings. They knew a tornado was possible, but they didn't believe it would hit them. The workers in the factory, they probably thought, we'll be fine. It's just a storm. The families who stayed in their homes, they probably thought, we've been through warnings before. Nothing ever happens. And then, it did happen. And by the time they realized the danger was real, it was too late. This is the cruel reality of disasters. The people who survive are often the ones who overreact, who take warnings seriously, who err on the side of caution. But our society doesn't reward that behavior. We mock people who panic. We roll our eyes at the alarmists until the disaster strikes. And then we ask, why didn't people listen? Let's talk about buildings. Because one of the most striking things about the Mayfield tornado was how completely it destroyed structures, brick buildings that had stood for over 100 years. Gone. The candle factory, a modern industrial building, flattened. Homes, churches, schools, obliterated. And this raises a critical question. Are our buildings strong enough? The answer, in most cases, is no. In the United States, building codes vary wildly from state to state, county to county. And in many areas, especially rural areas, there are no requirements for tornado-resistant construction. No reinforced safe rooms, no anchor bolts, no impact-resistant windows, just standard construction. And standard construction, it doesn't stand a chance against an EF4 tornado. Now, to be fair, building a structure that can withstand 200-mile-per-hour winds is expensive. We're talking reinforced concrete, steel frames, underground shelters. Most people can't afford that. But here's the thing. We could require it. We could update building codes. We could offer incentives, tax breaks, grants to help people retrofit their homes. We could make tornado shelters mandatory in schools, in factories, in public buildings. Other countries do this. Japan has strict earthquake codes. The Netherlands has flood protections. But in the United States, we wait for the disaster to happen. We count the bodies. We say thoughts and prayers. And then we rebuild, using the same inadequate standards. And the cycle continues. Let's return to the candle factory one more time. Because this building, this tragedy, has become a symbol of a larger debate about worker safety and corporate responsibility. Should the company have shut down when the warnings were issued? Should they have evacuated the workers? Should they have had a reinforced shelter on site? The company says they did everything right. They followed the rules. They had a plan. But 8 people are dead. And the survivors say they were told they'd be fired if they left. So, who's telling the truth? Probably both of them. Because here's the reality. In the United States, there are no federal laws requiring employers to close during severe weather. There are no laws requiring tornado shelters in workplaces. OSHA has guidelines, recommendations, but they're not enforceable. So the company probably did follow the rules. But the rules are inadequate. And that's the real problem. We've created a system where companies can legally keep workers in danger, where profits are prioritized over safety, where the burden of protection falls on the individual, not the employer. And when disaster strikes, the companies hide behind lawyers and insurance policies, and the workers, they're left with trauma, with injuries, with death. This is what happens when we value money over people. And until we change the laws, until we demand better, it will keep happening. Let me share some more survivor stories with you, because these are the voices that matter. These are the people who lived through the nightmare. There's Robert, a factory worker who was on his break when the tornado hit. He dove under a steel table as the roof collapsed around him. He was trapped for 3 hours, pinned by debris, unable to move. He said the worst part wasn't the pain. It was the silence. After the roar of the tornado faded, after the screaming stopped, there was just silence. And he thought, this is it. This is how I die. But then he heard voices, rescuers, calling out, searching. And he screamed back as loud as he could. And they found him. They pulled him out, and he survived. But he'll never work in a factory again. He can't. The trauma is too deep. Then there's Maria, a mother of 3 who lost her home. She and her kids were in the basement when the tornado hit. They heard the house being torn apart above them, the walls collapsing, the windows shattering. When they emerged, their home was gone. Everything they owned, gone. But they were alive. Maria said, "We lost everything, but we didn't lose each other, and that's what matters." She's been living in a FEMA trailer for 2 years now, waiting for insurance money, waiting for help, waiting to rebuild. And she's one of the lucky ones. Then there's the family of Trevor, one of the 8 workers who died in the factory. His wife, his children, they're still grieving. They're still angry. Because Trevor didn't have to die. He could have left. He could have gone home. But he was told he'd lose his job. And so he stayed. And he died. And no amount of money, no lawsuit, no apology will bring him back. 2 years later, Mayfield is rebuilding. Slowly, painfully, but rebuilding. New homes are going up. The downtown square is being restored. Businesses are reopening. There's a new candle factory built on a different site with better safety measures. The courthouse has been rebuilt. The water tower has been replaced. Life is returning to normal, but it's a new normal because the people of Mayfield will never forget. December 10th, 2021. They'll never forget the roar of the wind, the sight of their town destroyed, the loss of their friends and neighbors. Every year, on December 10th, they gather. They light candles. They say the names of the dead. They remember, because that's all they can do. Remember, rebuild, and hope that it never happens again. So, what can we learn from Mayfield? What does this disaster teach us about risk, about preparedness, about the world we live in? First, warnings matter. When the National Weather Service issues a tornado warning, take it seriously. Don't assume it won't hit you. Don't wait to see the funnel. Get to shelter. Get to the lowest level of your building. Get away from windows. Your life is worth more than your curiosity. Second, buildings matter. We need stronger building codes. We need tornado shelters in schools, in workplaces, in public spaces. We need to invest in infrastructure that protects people, not just profits. Third, workers matter. Employers should never put workers in danger. There should be laws, enforceable laws, that require businesses to close during severe weather. No job is worth your life. Fourth, climate matters. We can't keep ignoring the science. We can't keep pretending that extreme weather is just bad luck. Climate change is real. It's making disasters more frequent, more intense. And if we don't take action, if we don't reduce emissions, if we don't adapt, Mayfield will be just the beginning. Let's talk about the future for a moment. Because Tornado Alley, that swath of the central United States where tornadoes are most common, it's shifting. Traditionally, Tornado Alley included Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska, parts of Texas, but in recent years, the most violent tornadoes have been hitting further east. Kentucky, Tennessee, Alabama, Mississippi. This region is now being called Dixie Alley, and it's more dangerous than traditional Tornado Alley. Why? Because the terrain is different. There are more trees, more hills, which makes tornadoes harder to see. Because the population density is higher. More people in the path means more casualties. And because tornadoes in this region often strike at night, when people are sleeping, when visibility is zero. The Mayfield tornado hit at night. People couldn't see it coming. They couldn't see the destruction until it was too late. And as the climate continues to change, as the patterns continue to shift, we can expect more of this. More late-season outbreaks, more nighttime tornadoes, more death, unless we adapt. So, what can technology do to help? We've made incredible advances in tornado forecasting over the past few decades. Doppler radar can detect rotation inside storms. Computer models can predict severe weather days in advance. But we still can't predict exactly where a tornado will touch down, or how strong it will be, until it's already happening. And that's the gap that kills people. Researchers are working on it. They're developing better radar systems, better algorithms, better warning systems. There's talk of using artificial intelligence to analyze radar data in real time to issue more precise warnings. There's talk of building more tornado-resistant structures using advanced materials and engineering. There's talk of creating underground shelter networks, community-safe rooms that anyone can access. But talk is cheap. What we need is action. We need funding. We need political will. Because the technology exists, the knowledge exists. What's missing is the commitment to actually implement it. In Mayfield, there's a memorial now, a simple stone monument in the downtown square with the names of the 24 people from Graves County who died in the tornado. People leave flowers there, candles, notes. On December 10th, every year, the community gathers, they hold hands, they cry, and they remember. Because that's what memorials are for. Not just to honor the dead, but to remind the living, to remind us that life is fragile, that disaster can strike at any moment, that we need to cherish every day, every person, every breath. The memorial is a place of grief, but it's also a place of hope, because the people of Mayfield are survivors. They've been knocked down, but they've gotten back up. They've lost so much, but they haven't lost their spirit. And that is the true story of Mayfield. Not just the destruction, not just the death, but the resilience, the courage, the refusal to give up. Let me tell you about one more person. Her name is Sarah. She was a teacher at Mayfield Elementary School. On the night of the tornado, she wasn't at the school. She was at home with her husband and 2 young daughters. When the warnings came, they went to their basement. They huddled together, listening to the roar. And then, their house was gone. Just gone. They climbed out of the basement into nothing. No walls, no roof, just rubble. But they were alive. Sarah's first thought wasn't about her house, her belongings, her life. It was about her students. She grabbed her phone, which miraculously still worked, and she started calling parents, checking on kids, making sure everyone was okay. And then, the next morning, even though her own life was in ruins, she went to the school, or what was left of it, because the school had been hit too, classrooms destroyed, books scattered, desks crushed. But Sarah didn't cry. She didn't break. She started cleaning. She started organizing. She started planning how to get her students back to learning, because that's what teachers do. They put their students first, even when their own world is falling apart. Sarah is still teaching in Mayfield today, in a temporary building with donated supplies, with students who are still traumatized. But she's there, every day, showing up, making a difference. And that is heroism. Let's talk about money for a moment, because disasters aren't just about lives lost. They're about economies destroyed. The Mayfield tornado caused an estimated $2 billion in damage across Kentucky. In Graves County alone, more than 3,000 homes were damaged or destroyed. Nearly 200 businesses were wiped out. The tax base collapsed. Revenue plummeted. And rebuilding? It's expensive. Insurance helps, but it doesn't cover everything. Many people were underinsured. Some had no insurance at all. FEMA provides assistance, but it's limited. A few $1,000s to help with temporary housing, with immediate needs. But rebuilding a home? That costs hundreds of thousands of dollars. Starting a business? Even more. So, what happens to the people who can't afford to rebuild? They leave. They move to other towns, other states. They start over somewhere else. And the community? It shrinks. Mayfield's population has dropped since the tornado. Businesses that closed have never reopened. The economic recovery is slow, and for some, it will never be complete. This is the hidden cost of disasters, not just the immediate destruction, but the long-term decline, the loss of population, of businesses, of opportunity. And it's a cost that falls hardest on the people who can least afford it, the poor, the elderly, the vulnerable. We need to talk about mental health, because the psychological impact of the Mayfield tornado is staggering. Post-traumatic stress disorder, depression, anxiety, survivors' guilt, children who can't sleep, adults who can't function, families torn apart by grief. The need for mental health services has exploded, but the resources? They're inadequate. There aren't enough therapists, there aren't enough counselors, there aren't enough support groups, and many people, they can't afford treatment, so they suffer in silence. They self-medicate with alcohol, with drugs. They withdraw from friends, from family. Some don't make it. Suicide rates in disaster-affected communities often spike in the months and years after the event. This is the invisible toll of disasters. The wounds you can't see. And it's a toll that lasts for years, for decades, for lifetimes. We need to do better. We need to invest in mental health services. We need to make treatment accessible, affordable, available. Because saving lives doesn't end when the rubble is cleared. It continues for years afterward. Let's return to the question of justice. Because for many survivors, for many families of the dead, justice has not been served. The lawsuit against the candle factory is still pending. It could take years to resolve. And even if the plaintiffs win, even if they're awarded millions of dollars, will that be justice? Can money bring back the dead? Can it erase the trauma? The answer is no. Justice in cases like this is complicated because the company will argue they followed the rules. They'll argue the tornado was an act of God, something beyond their control. And legally, they might be right. But morally, ethically, they kept workers in a building during a tornado emergency. They prioritized production over safety, and 8 people died. That's not justice. That's not right. But our legal system, it's not designed for moral justice. It's designed for legal justice. And those two things, they're not always the same. So the families wait. They grieve. They hope for some kind of accountability. But deep down, they know that no court, no verdict, no amount of money will ever make this right. So what do? Those of us watching from a distance, those of us who weren't there, who didn't lose everything, what's our responsibility? First, We remember. We don't let Mayfield become just another statistic, just another forgotten disaster. We keep telling the stories. We keep saying the names. Second, we demand change. We demand stronger building codes. We demand better worker protections. We demand action on climate change. We call our representatives. We vote. We make our voices heard. Third, we prepare. We make sure we have a plan. We know where to go in a tornado. We have supplies, a shelter, a way to get warnings, because it's not a question of if disaster will strike. It's a question of when, and when it does, we want to be ready. Fourth, we support survivors. We donate to relief organizations. We volunteer. We show up. Because disasters don't end when the cameras leave. They continue for years. And survivors need our support, our compassion, our help. Not just in the immediate aftermath, but for the long haul. December 10th, 2021. A date that will live in infamy for the people of Mayfield, Kentucky. The night the sky turned black. The night the wind roared. The night a town was destroyed. But it's also a date that reveals something important about who we are as a society. It reveals our vulnerabilities, our failures to protect the most vulnerable among us. But it also reveals our strengths, our capacity for resilience, for compassion, for courage. The people of Mayfield have been through hell. They've lost loved ones, lost homes, lost their sense of safety. But they're still standing, they're still fighting, they're still rebuilding, and that is the human spirit. That is what makes us strong. Not our buildings, not our technology, not our wealth, but our ability to endure, to adapt, to come together in the face of tragedy. The Mayfield tornado was a disaster, a horror, a tragedy. But the story of Mayfield, it's a story of survival. And as long as we remember that, as long as we honor the dead and support the living, then Mayfield will never be forgotten. The wind has stopped blowing, the debris has been cleared, the sirens have gone silent. But the memory remains, in the empty lots where homes once stood, in the faces of survivors who still flinch when the sky turns dark, in the names carved into stone. Mayfield, Kentucky, December 10th, 2021. A town destroyed, a community shattered, lives lost, but also a town rebuilding, a community united, lives honored. This is their story. This is their truth, and we will never forget. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. If this story moved you, if it made you think, if it made you feel, please share it. Please spread the word. Because these stories matter. These lives matter. And the more we remember, the more we learn, the more we demand change, the better chance we have of preventing the next tragedy. Stay safe, stay prepared, and stay human. Until next time.